Hello everyone, welcome to the second lecture of the course Introduction to Advanced Cognitive Processes. I am Dr. Ark Verma from IIT Kanpur. We are talking about language in this week, and in the last lecture we discussed a lot about what are concepts and how concepts help us categorize in the world. We talked about a couple of theories about how categorization is achieved and how may this categorization help us organize our world into different blocks. Today, I am taking one of those approaches that says that concepts are arranged or organized in a particular manner in our brain. Or let us say you can think of this as a hypothetical network or a hypothetical organization which may or may not be exactly the same as you have organized concepts in your brain. This approach is referred to as the semantic networks approach. Now, the semantic networks approach is an approach that specifies how are concepts related and organized in the human brain. This was proposed by Collinson Quillin in 1969, and basically it is a system wherein it is seen as a network, and in these networks there are various nodes. Each node basically talks about a particular concept or a category, and different nodes within this network are linked by virtue of similarity in property or by virtue of relatedness. Say for example, a dog or a cat might be related to each other because both are pet animals. So, this is again a brief description about this network. We will quickly see the examples and we will talk about how these things are there. Now, concepts or nodes in this network are linked by particular linkages, which is basically by virtue of their similarity or say for example if they are related in the human brain. This is also a hierarchical model because it consists of levels arranged such that specific concepts are at lower levels and more generic concepts are at higher levels. If I take an example of canary, canary is generally at the bottom, and more general concepts like that canary is a bird or that it is a living thing are higher up in the model. Now, how does this model work? Suppose you are entering such a network at any possible concept. Again, because I talked about canary, let us enter this network at the word canary. If you want to know more about canary, then you may go one level up and you will discover that it is a bird, and at the node itself the properties of the birds are mentioned. Say for example, they will be mentioned that it has feathers, it can fly, it has a beak, etc., etc. Also, if you want to know about something very specific about the canary itself, you might jump one node below the node on canary and you might come to know that it is yellow in color, it sings a beautiful song, things like that. If you look at this network, this is the semantic network which was proposed by Collinson Quillin. You can see that there are at the top the most generic node, that is of a living thing, and the properties of a living thing are mentioned. Living things can grow, living things are living for that matter, or they move around, which is probably not true in case of trees. But again, there is where it diverges. It diverges to two other slightly less general links like plants and animals, and again plants and animals are large families in itself. So, you see you can come down a little bit where you have things like a bird and you have things like fish under animal, and you have things like trees and flowers under plants. If you now go to these specific links, you will see the node of a bird has feathers, it can fly, it has wings. You will see that these links have specific properties attached to them. So, these links are basically relational links which express the properties of the node. A bird has feathers, so it is connected by the has link. A bird can fly, so it is connected by the can link, and the bird has wings, so it is connected again by the has link. Also, it is connected on a more specific level by links which are like is a. So, you have bird and then you have is a connection with canary, you might have is a connection with a robin or a sparrow. So, you can actually try and read it in a way that robin is a bird, canary is a bird, something like that. Now, you will see this network is fairly general, though it is fairly specific and informative as well. You can also see that both robin and canary are connected to each other in this network by virtue of this common link called bird. This is how exactly how concepts might be associated in our memories. When we talk about birds, we can talk about all birds or most of the birds. If somebody is asking us to, let us say, list list 10 birds, list 20 birds, etc., we will be able to recall the name of other birds even if one exemplar of the bird category is given to us. This is pretty much what Collinson Quillin trying to simulate or trying to represent in their semantic networks model. Let us learn a little bit more about this model now. Now, how do the elements of these semantic networks correspond to the actual working of the brain, you may ask. Now, the links and nodes in this network may not necessarily correspond to specific locations in the brain. So, it is not exactly that this network is representing how these concepts are connected in the brain, but they might actually represent, or they might actually prove analogical to the way these properties and these concepts are associated with each other in the brain. As I was again giving the example of the bird and the robin. Now, bird and robin are both birds, and you can if you try and remember, talk about them in pretty much the same way because they share other properties as well. They have beaks, feathers, can fly, etc. So, the semantic network tries to appropriate these similarities and tries to represent these similarities in a way that can be more easily understood by form of this particular network. Also, and again, this model was proposed a long time back. There has been a lot of neuroscience research after this model has been proposed. So, there have been physiological models and physiological findings relevant to these models. People have found neurons that respond specifically to particular categories and not to other categories. Now, these findings were not available at the time when Collinson Quillin had proposed the semantic networks theory. However, later evidences have in some cases supported and in some cases not supported their theory, as happens with most theoretical models in any science, for example. Now, notwithstanding these neural connections or the lack of them, it can be asked, however, whether the Collinson Quillin's model actually represents how concepts are organized in the mind. We will have a look at that as we move ahead. Now, this network's hierarchical organization, it results in a rather testable prediction that the time it takes for a person to retrieve information about a concept could be determined by the distance you need to travel in the semantic network. So, the idea is, if you want to test whether it takes more time to talk about a canary, that it can sing or something, or whether it should take more time to talk about whether a canary is a bird or a living thing. Now, there is a particular technique that researchers have used to test these kind of questions, and this technique is referred to as the sentence verification technique. So, what they do in the sentence verification technique is that participants are asked to answer in yes or no to particular statements about these kind of concepts. You might be asked to say yes or no to the statement, a canary is a bird, or a canary is an animal, or a canary can fly. So, you have to decide in yes or no to these particular statements, and different kinds of statements are tested and they are compared against each other, and the reaction times are noted down. The reaction times basically are informative of the fact that how much distance you had to travel in this network, and the prediction is that if you have to travel less distance, you will be fast, or the other way around, because you were fast, it seems that you traveled less distance in this semantic network. Now, this prediction follows basically from the idea that it is necessary. So, again, if I go to the question that whether canary is an animal, a canary is an animal, yes or no, a canary is a bird, yes or no. Now, again, if you are comparing these two statements, some people might think that it might be easier to respond to the fact that a canary is a bird than to respond to the fact that a canary is an animal. The idea here is, or this prediction basically follows, that it is necessary to travel two links from canary to animal. So, you go from canary to bird to animal in order to answer the first statement, and you just have to go from a canary to a bird to answer the second statement. So, the prediction of the Collinson Quillin's model is that you will take less time to answer in yes or no to a canary is a bird versus a canary is an animal. If you look at this network here, I think you will better understand what I am trying to say. So, if you see canary is linked to bird in just one way, and then there is a second link from bird to animal that you will have to travel. So this is pretty much what I was trying to tell here. This is exactly what Collinson Quillin actually found. So they tested this particular prediction by measuring the reaction times to a number of different statements, and some of those statements are mentioned here. So you can see a canary is the fastest among all, and then is a canary is a bird, and then the canary is an animal. Here we are talking about categories. You can also do a different kind of a test. You can test for properties. So a canary can sing versus a canary can fly versus a canary has skin are also at different reaction times. But you can notice that a canary is a canary, it requires almost no distance traveling whatsoever, so it is the fastest. A canary is a bird, requires one step, and a canary is an animal, requires 2 steps and is accordingly slower. Another property of the semantic networks is the property of spreading activation. What is spreading activation? By spreading activation, one means that there is activity on each node is spread out along any of the links that is connected to the particular activated node. Suppose I am showing you a picture of a canary, and the canary gets activated. Now, if canary is getting activated, the links which are the nodes which are connected to the canary will also get activated. You can see here. So when a canary is activated, the node at bird is getting activated, the node at animal is getting activated, also the node at ostrich is getting activated, the node at robin is also getting activated. So the idea is you can see these dotted lines represent the spreading of activation from one of the activated nodes. You could have very well talked about an ostrich, and a similar activation pattern would have emerged. So something that I already said. So if you're moving through the network from robin to bird, it will activate the node at bird, and also the links we use to get from robin to bird will activate it. And you can see here they are activated, they are represented by the blue arrow here. So you're talking about robin, it activates bird, it activates animal by the dotted line. The key manipulation that one can do, but according to the spreading activation account, this activation also spreads to other nodes in the network that are connected to bird, something that I already said. As a result, additional concepts that receive this activation, because you mentioned robin or you've mentioned canary, will become primed in some sense, and they can also be retrieved more easily from the memory. Priming basically refers to that some kind of residual activation is communicated to these connected nodes. Now, Meyer and Schwanwelt, they basically wanted to test this idea in a study using the lexical decision task. What is the lexical decision task? Lexical decision task is basically when you are presented with a word or a pair of words, and you have to respond in yes or no that it is a word or a non-word. Now, in their specific experiments, they presented participants with 2 strings of letters, one above the other, and the participants' task was to press as quickly as possible the yes key when both of the strings are words, and the no key when either one or both of the strings were non-words. The key manipulation being that on some trials the 2 words were closely associated to each other, say for example bread and wheat, and in some trials they were weakly associated, say for example chair and money. Now, the results showed, and we can see the results here, the results showed that the reaction times were much faster when the 2 words were closely related to each other. So, you can see here on the left, these are the example stimulis and then the correct responses there. If you see on the right in the results section, you will see that the associated words are reacted to much faster as compared to words that are not associated to each other. Why is this happening? Meyer and Schwanwelt proposed that this might have occurred because retrieving one of the 2 words from the memory triggered a spread of activation to the other node as well, or the other nearby locations in the semantic network, and as related words share a lot of this activation, answering in affirmative to both of the associated words was much easier as compared to words that were not associated to each other. Because these words were not associated to each other, then you have to evaluate both of them separately and then give a yes or no response as required. So, this is pretty much what Meyer and Schwanwelt did. Now, the Collinson Quillin model, even though it is one of the more popular models in semantic network theory, and it was one of the first models that actually came along, this model also had some of its own problems. If you remember, yesterday we were talking about the typicality effect. What was the typicality effect? The typicality effect was that if you're talking about let us say members of a particular category, the more typical members, or let us say the more prototypical members of that particular category are named first, and they are responded to faster than the less typical or less prototypical members of the category. Remember, we are talking about the example between, say for example, sparrow being a typical member of the bird, a highly typical member of the bird category, and penguin or ostrich being less typical members of the category of birds, and bat being the least typical member. So, if you remember that, we can talk about this criticism now. This model could not explain the typicality effect. So, Collinson Quillin's model basically could not explain why reaction times would be faster about an object which are more typical, and not really too fast about an object which are less typical. Now, the statement, so for example, the statement a canary is a bird is verified more quickly than an ostrich is a bird in behavioral experiments, but the semantic networks model of Collinson Quillin predicts that these should be activated, or these should be responded to with equal speed, because canary and ostrich are technically just one node away from each other. So, this is one of the things that this model could not explain. Further, researchers also tried to question the concept of cognitive economy. Now, the concept of cognitive economy is this: the idea is that people in fact may want to store all the information in one place, so that whenever you want to pick that node up or remember that piece of information, everything is available at the same place. Now, because of the principle of cognitive economy, some of the researchers proposed that people may in fact be storing specific properties of concepts like has wings for canary right at the node for that concept. You do not need to travel from canary to bird to notice that it can fly. If you can see this connection right here. So, to know that it flies, you will have to, in this network, go from canary to bird, and then you will see that birds can fly, hence canary can fly. Now, this is probably not the best way of storing this, because once you are primed with the concept canary, you should have that information right away. Again, this is what some researchers are saying. So, again, this is again one of the criticisms of the Collinson Quillin's model. Now, Rips and colleagues, they basically did this experiment, and they obtained sentence verification results for the following statements. So, the statements were, say for example, a pig is a mammal, and the other statement is a pig is an animal, and you can see that the reaction times are very different in these two statements. So, a pig is an animal is reacted to much faster as compared to a pig is a mammal. Now, if you go by virtue of semantics of the semantic network that Collinson Quillin have proposed, mammal should actually come one level below animal, and in that sense people should be able to respond to this much faster as compared to the statement that a pig is an animal. Now, this finding is obviously contrary to the prediction that the model has, and again this is one of the problems with this particular model. Here you can see that a pig is a mammal is just one step, and a pig is a animal is 2 steps. So, actually pig is a mammal should be faster, but we see that in the results it is not coming out to be so. So, with these criticisms in mind, Collins went on to work and better the current model, and in 1975 Collins and Loftis, they proposed a different model. They proposed a model in which these concepts are more closely related. The concepts that are more closely related are connected to each other with shorter lines. So, the idea is, if a particular concept is very closely related in your memory, the links between the two will be represented by shorter lines, which basically reflects in faster processing times, better accuracy, and so on and so forth. So, I'll take an example that the book mentions. So, for example, if the vehicle is connected to car, truck and bus by short links, it would be by shorter lines, car and truck and bus, it would be by shorter lines than as compared to its connection with the fire engine. So, you have the category of vehicle and you have car, truck and bus. If you can see this model here, if you see the category of vehicle is connected with shorter line with car or similar lines with car, truck and bus, but the lines for fire engine and ambulance are slightly longer. So, this model kind of predicts that if you are talking about a car and when you're talking about the category vehicle, your reaction times should be faster. This is an attempt to actually explain or actually factor in the typicality effect we were just talking about. Collinson Loftis model also abandons the hierarchical structure used by the earlier model. So, earlier model had a basic level, if I may say so, at canary, and it has a more general level at mammal or at bird and animal and living thing, and it has a more specific level at canary, gansing, etc. The idea is this, herein they kind of abandoned this hierarchical structure, and they basically replace the same structure as a structure that is modulated by a personal experience, your individual experiences, because people actually move around, they get they encounter various sorts of things, they pick up facts about these things, they notice behavior of particular things, and all of that needs to get factored into the conceptual organization. So, it was probably a good move that they kind of are coming up with a model that factors in personal experience, because my experience with particular kind of things might be very different than your experience with the same kind of things. And so, in my conceptual representation, maybe I will be faster for saying a pig is a mammal, but because in your conceptual organization, you will be faster for a pig is an animal, things like that. Now, this would basically imply, factoring in personal experience, that the spacing between various connections could differ from various people depending upon their experience and knowledge about specific concepts. Also, Collins and Loftis propose another a large number of additional modifications and small things here and there to the Collinson Quillin's model to deal with problems like the ones we pointed out earlier, problems of cognitive economy, the pig mammal problem, and those kind of things. With these changes made, this model could now explain most experimental results people were getting. Collins and Loftis described their theory as a fairly complicated theory with enough generality to apply to results from many and various experimental paradigms. Now, this model kind of in that sense becomes very powerful. Now, if you kind of look at both of these models, the Collinson Quillin model and Collinson Loftis model, you can say a few things about semantic network theories in general. So, let us kind of try and do that. So, although Collinson Quillin's semantic networks theory, it does explain and predict some of the experimental results, there was quite a few things that it could not explain. But the Collinson Loftis theory, though it can make up for most of the earlier theory's flaws, it could actually explain most of the results, and because it could explain almost any result you throw at it, it becomes slightly difficult to falsify. In the earlier course, when I was talking about how scientific theories are developed, I have mentioned again and again that one of the most important properties of a scientific theory is that it should be easily falsifiable, or it should be falsifiable. You could come up with particular counter instances and show that here the theory is not going to work. For example, let us take an example from their network. If one compares the length of links, say from vehicle to car or from vehicle to fire engine, then this length can be now adjusted by personal experience. Now, it is possible in this scenario that keeping these factors in mind, personal experiences, basic knowledge, all those intelligence, socioeconomics, you can bring in too many variables that you want to. This theory can be able to explain almost anything. When you say personal experience, you are probably talking about so many things. Now, in this sense, the theory becomes very flexible and the theory becomes very difficult to falsify. At the same time, then it does not remain a very good scientific theory that one would vouch by. That is actually one of the major criticisms that was held, that was put forward against this Collinson Loftis theory, Collinson Loftis theory of semantic networks. Now, and this is pretty much what was actually summed up by Johnson, Laird and colleagues, because they criticized this Collinson Loftis semantic network theory, and they commented that these theories are too powerful to be refuted by any empirical evidence that you might be able to gather. So, this is all about semantic networks from my side today, and in the next class we will talk about something other than semantic networks. Thank you.